The desert stretched endlessly, silent and golden under the fading sun. Sand dunes rolled like frozen waves, and the wind carried with it the dry taste of dust and forgotten stories. A lone traveler moved slowly across this land. He was called Man Alone because he belonged nowhere and carried no one's name but his own. His boots were worn, his coat was faded, and his eyes carried a shadow of someone who had walked too far and seen too much. Yet he kept going, because the desert never stopped, and neither did he. That evening, as the sky turned orange and then purple, Man Alone noticed a small flicker of light ahead. In the emptiness of the desert, a fire meant life or danger. He moved cautiously, his steps careful, until he reached the edge of a canyon wall where the flames danced quietly. There, sitting near the fire, was a girl. She looked young, with long dark hair tied loosely, her clothes simple and worn. Her eyes were steady, but there was something about them that seemed much older than her face. She was Apache. That much he could tell from the way she sat, the way she held her shoulders as if carrying history on her back. She did not rise when she saw him approach, nor did she appear frightened. Instead, she looked at him as though she had been expecting him all along. Man Alone stopped a few steps away, unsure if he was welcome. But the girl gave the smallest nod, and that was enough. He lowered himself onto the ground near the fire, but not too close, and let the warmth of the flames touch his tired body. The silence between them stretched long, but it was not uncomfortable. Out here, words were not always needed. After some time, his eyes drifted to her hands. One wrist was wrapped in a piece of old cloth, tightly knotted. It was not the kind of wrapping used for injury or protection. It looked ceremonial, deliberate, as though it had been tied with purpose long ago. The cloth was faded, but the knot held strong, like it had never been undone. The girl noticed his glance. For the first time she spoke. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried through the dry desert air with surprising clarity. "Don't untie this cloth," she said, her eyes fixed on him. "No matter what happens, no matter what you feel, don't touch it." Her words hung heavy between them. Man Alone did not answer right away. He had lived long enough to know that warnings were not given without reason. Yet the more he looked at the cloth, the more questions grew inside him. Why did she protect it so fiercely? What was hidden beneath it? The fire crackled, throwing sparks into the night. Coyotes howled far in the distance, their cries echoing across the canyon walls. The desert seemed to listen to her words as though it too understood the weight of the warning. Man Alone finally asked, his voice low and even. "Why?" The girl looked into the flames, not at him. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she spoke again, her words careful, as if she feared they might escape beyond the firelight. "Some things are meant to stay hidden. Some knots are tied not to be opened, but to protect what lies beneath. If you untie it, you cannot go back." Her answer was not enough to satisfy him, but he did not press further. He knew that trust was not built with questions, so he remained silent, letting the fire's warmth sink into his skin. Still, the image of the cloth burned itself into his mind. As the night deepened, the girl shared small pieces of her story. She spoke of her family, though she did not use names. She said they were gone, taken by something the desert had swallowed long ago. She spoke of her people who once walked proudly across these lands, holding wisdom that outsiders could not understand. And she spoke of the cloth, though never directly. Instead, she circled around it, like one walks around a dangerous cliff without stepping too close. Her words painted fragments of an old tale. A tale of power bound by knots, a tale of bloodlines carrying marks that should never be revealed. It was not a full story, but enough to stir unease inside him. The more she spoke, the more Man Alone felt the desert itself shift. The air seemed heavier, the shadows darker. Even the fire gave off sparks that glowed strangely before fading. The coyotes' cries grew sharper, like warnings in the distance. Everything seemed to whisper the same truth. The cloth was not ordinary, but Man Alone was not an ordinary man either. He was curious, perhaps to a fault. He had walked too many empty roads, searching for meaning in silence. And here at this fire, with this mysterious girl and her whispered warning, he felt he might be close to finding something greater than himself. Still, he said nothing more. He closed his eyes and let the sounds of the desert fill his ears, the wind brushing against stone, the fire popping softly, the girl's quiet breathing. Sleep came to him slowly, filled with dreams of knots of cloth unraveling, of symbols glowing beneath skin. When he woke, the stars had shifted. and the fire was burning low. The girl sat awake watching him silently, her hand resting protectively over the cloth. She did not speak, but her eyes carried the same message. Do not untie it. Man alone sat up, his mind restless. He had always lived by his own rules, but now he found himself caught between respect for her warning and the gnawing hunger to know what she was hiding. The desert stretched endlessly around them, but in that moment it felt smaller, as if all the world had narrowed to the knot on her wrist. The night passed slowly. The fire dimmed to embers, and the first hint of dawn touched the horizon. Man alone had not touched the cloth, not yet, but the weight of temptation pressed heavily on him. He knew this was only the beginning, and whatever the truth was, it would not remain hidden forever. The first rays of dawn brushed the desert, painting the horizon with pale gold. The night's chill was fading, but the silence of the land felt deeper than before. Man alone sat near the fire, staring at the last flickers of flame. Across from him, the Apache girl watched the sky as though searching for signs in the morning light. Her hand still rested protectively over her wrist, the cloth tied firmly in place, its knot as strong as if sealed by time itself. Man alone had spent most of the night fighting with his own thoughts. He was a man used to traveling without attachments, used to meeting strangers and leaving them behind. But this girl's warning had settled in his mind like a stone in water, sending ripples through every corner of his thoughts. Why would a simple cloth be guarded with such fear? What could possibly lie beneath it that demanded such secrecy? The girl finally broke the silence. You didn't sleep, she said softly, not asking but stating what she already knew. I slept enough, he answered, though his eyes betrayed the restlessness in his mind. She studied him carefully, then looked down at the cloth. The knot disturbs you, he did not deny it. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and asked in a quiet tone, What is it hiding? The girl's lips pressed together. For a moment she seemed ready to refuse the question. Then she sighed and spoke, her words slow as though carrying weight beyond her years. My people tied knots to seal what should never be opened, she said. Some knots bound prayers, some bound curses, some bound memories too heavy to be carried in the heart. She paused, her eyes fixed on the cloth. This knot is all of those things. It is a seal, a warning, and a burden. Man alone frowned, his curiosity sharpened even more. And you carry it on your wrist? I was chosen, she whispered, her voice almost breaking. Not because I wanted it, but because the desert chose me. Her words carried a strange finality, as if the matter could not be argued. But man alone was not the kind to let silence settle over mysteries. He leaned back against a rock, folding his arms. You speak in riddles, he said. If it is a curse, why live with it? If it is power, why not use it? If it is memory, why not share it? The girl turned her gaze on him, her dark eyes flashing. Because some truths are not meant to be touched by human hands. Some truths consume those who seek them. You think curiosity is harmless, but it is a fire. Fire can warm or destroy, and men often forget the difference. Her words struck him, but rather than quieting him, they deepened the storm inside. He had lived too long on empty roads, searching for something to give his wandering meaning. Now here was a mystery wrapped in cloth, guarded with fear, and every instinct told him it was something important, something he could not simply ignore. The girl sensed his struggle. She pulled her arm closer to her chest and whispered, I told you not to untie it. If you do, what you see will change everything. You will not remain the same. The world around you will not remain the same. Man alone stared at her, his jaw tightening. He did not reply. His silence was not agreement, it was hunger. The desert day stretched on. They did not travel, for the girl said they must wait for the right time. She gathered herbs near the canyon wall, murmuring words in her language as she ground them into paste. Man alone watched, wondering if her actions were tied to the cloth or simply part of her survival. At noon, the heat pressed down like a heavy hand. They sat in the shade of the rocks, sharing what little food they had. Man alone asked no more questions, but his eyes often strayed to her wrist. Each time the girl noticed, and each time she gave him the same look, a warning, a plea, and a command all in one. By evening, as the sun sank low again, the air grew tense. The wind picked up, carrying dust across the canyon floor. The girl grew restless, her eyes darting to the horizon as though she expected something or someone. They will come soon, she said suddenly. Man alone raised an eyebrow. Who? My ancestors, she replied, her voice trembling. When night falls, they will whisper again. They always do when the cloth is threatened. He looked around the canyon, seeing nothing but rock and shadow. Yet her tone was not one of superstition, it was certainty. She believed what she said. Night fell like a heavy curtain. The fire was lit once more, casting flickering shadows across the canyon walls. The girl sat close to the flames, her head bowed, whispering words in Apache that man alone could not understand. He sat across from her, his body still but his mind racing. Then it began. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it voices. Not the voices of men or women nearby, but faint echoes that seemed to come from the stones themselves. Low whispers rose and fell, blending with the fire's crackle. Man alone froze, his hand unconsciously gripping the hilt of his knife. The girl did not move. "They are here," she whispered. Man alone strained his ears. The voices were not clear, but they were there, murmurs in a language long forgotten, carrying both sorrow and warning. His skin prickled as if unseen eyes were upon him. The girl lifted her head slowly. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a strange light. She looked at him, her voice breaking. "They say you are not meant to stay. They say you are a danger." Man alone felt the air grow colder. He spoke through clenched teeth. "And yet here I am." Her hand trembled over the cloth. "That is why the knot must not be touched. If it is opened, they will not only whisper, they will rise." The fire flared suddenly, tall and wild, as though fed by something unseen. The whispers grew louder, circling the canyon like a storm of voices. Man alone's heart pounded, but his eyes were fixed on the cloth. His curiosity, already sharpened, now burned like fire. The girl shouted above the whispers, her voice filled with desperation. "Promise me. Promise me you will never untie it." But man alone did not answer. His silence was dangerous, and the girl knew it. She clutched her wrist tightly, as though her grip alone could keep the knot sealed. And still, through the fear and the firelight, man alone could not look away. The desert night was alive with whispers. The fire burned high, though no extra wood had been added. The flames bent strangely, as if bowing to unseen figures that moved in the darkness. The air was heavy, pressing down on man alone's chest with an unseen weight. Across from him, the Apache girl sat trembling, clutching her wrist where the old cloth was tied. Her eyes shone with fear and something else. Sorrow. She whispered through the noise of the voices that circled them like wind. "Do not touch it. You do not understand what it holds." But man alone could not look away. His gaze was fixed on the knot, old and frayed, yet unbroken. It was as if every road he had walked, every lonely mile across barren lands, had brought him to this fire and this knot. His whole life had been emptiness, filled only by his wandering. Now here was a mystery, a secret hidden under cloth, guarded with such fear that his hands itched with temptation. The whispers grew louder, echoing against the canyon walls. They were not in a language he knew, yet he felt their meaning in his bones. Warning. Danger. Leave. His heart pounded, but still he sat unmoving, staring at the girl's wrist. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady but low. "If it is so dangerous, why give me the chance to see it? Why let me sit here at all?" The girl shook her head, her hair falling loose across her face. "Because the desert chose you. I did not. If I had the choice, you would not be here." Her words cut deep, but they did not weaken his resolve. They only pushed him closer to the edge. He leaned forward, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "You speak of ancestors, curses, knots, yet you give no answer. You expect me to live with questions that will never be answered?" The girl's voice rose, sharp with fear. "Yes." Because some answers destroy those who hear them. But man alone was no longer listening. His hand had already begun to move, slowly, carefully, reaching toward her wrist. The girl jerked back, clutching her arm to her chest. Her breath came quick, her eyes wild. "Don't," she begged, her voice breaking. "You will see things you cannot unsee. You will carry a weight you cannot lay down. Please, leave it bound." For a moment, man alone hesitated. Her fear was real, her voice full of desperation, but then the whispers surged again. Louder than before, a chorus of voices filling the canyon. The fire roared upward, sparks flying into the dark sky. The sound of the whispers was unbearable now, pressing into his skull, making his heart race faster. And in that storm of voices, curiosity swallowed fear. With a sudden motion, he caught her wrist. The girl cried out, struggling, but he held firm. His other hand moved to the knot. "Forgive me," he muttered, though he was not sure if he spoke to her ancestors, or to the desert itself. The cloth felt rough under his fingers. The knot resisted at first, tight and unyielding, as though bound not just by hands but by time itself. He pulled harder. The fibers groaned, then loosened. The girl screamed, twisting to free herself, but it was too late. The knot slipped free. The cloth unraveled, falling away into his hand like dead weight. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The whispers stopped. The fire froze, its flames holding perfectly still. The desert fell into a silence so deep it rang in his ears. Man alone looked down at her wrist, expecting a wound, a scar, perhaps a mark of some kind. What he saw made him freeze. Beneath the cloth was no ordinary skin. Her wrist bore a symbol carved deep into the flesh. Not with blood, but with light. Lines glowed faintly, weaving into shapes that seemed to shift as he stared. Circles within circles, lines crossing into patterns too complex for the human mind to hold. It pulsed like a heartbeat, alive, glowing as if fire had been set beneath her skin. The girl sobbed, pulling her arm back, but the light only grew stronger. It spread from her wrist up her arm, glowing lines crawling like vines beneath the surface of her skin. Man alone's breath caught. The air around him shifted. Shadows lengthened, twisting into forms. For a brief, terrifying moment, he saw faces in the darkness, faces of people long gone, watching him with hollow eyes. The whispers returned, louder, clearer. Now he could hear the words, "You have broken the seal." His body shook as the canyon seemed to bend, the rocks shimmering like water. The fire blazed, then collapsed into ash, only to flare again. The desert was no longer silent. It was alive, speaking, roaring, warning. The girl lifted her glowing arm, her face pale with terror. "You have bound yourself to me," she cried. "It is done. The knot is undone and the seal is broken. Now you will see what should never be seen." Man alone staggered back, but he could not look away. The glowing marks on her arm spread faster now, reaching her shoulder, her chest. The symbols pulsed with each beat of her heart, as though something inside her had been waiting for this moment to awaken. Visions struck him like lightning. He saw flashes of ancient rituals under desert moons, where her people tied knots with trembling hands. He saw warriors standing in circles, chanting words that bound spirits into cloth. He saw the desert swallowing whole villages, leaving only whispers behind. He gasped for air, clutching his head, but the visions kept pouring into him. The girl reached for him with her glowing hand, and the moment her skin touched his, the visions became his own memories. He saw her ancestors, their lives, their pain, their battles. He saw blood spilled on the sand, not as violence but as sacrifice. He felt the weight of centuries pressing down on his shoulders, the burden of 1,000 secrets that had been sealed in knots and handed down through generations. When the visions finally released him, he fell to his knees, gasping. The girl crouched before him, tears streaming down her face, her arms still glowing like fire. "Now you know," she whispered, her voice broken. "This is why I begged you not to untie it. You have taken what was sealed. You cannot give it back. It is yours now as much as it is mine." Man alone lifted his head slowly, his eyes wide with shock. He looked at her, then at the glowing marks, then at his own hands. They were trembling, but when he turned them over, he froze again. Faint lines glowed on his palms. The bond had already begun. The girl closed her eyes, whispering words in her language, words that trembled with sorrow. "You are no longer man alone. The desert has tied you to me, and to what lives within this seal." The canyon was silent once more, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of something waiting. Man alone sat frozen, staring at his glowing hands, knowing nothing would ever be the same. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, but the light on the girl's arm glowed brighter than any flame. Her skin shimmered with strange patterns, lines of light that twisted and shifted as though alive. Man alone sat across from her, still on his knees, staring at his trembling hands. The faint glow etched into his palms flickered like the echo of what burned on her skin. The canyon was silent now. The whispers had faded, but silence itself felt alive, as though thousands of unseen eyes watched them closely. The air was thick, heavy, filled with a sense of waiting. The girl finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but each word cut the air like a blade. "It is done. The seal has passed to you. You are bound now. You carry what my people tried to keep hidden for centuries." Man alone raised his head, his eyes still wide. What is it?" His voice cracked, betraying both fear and desperation. "What have I seen? What is inside me now?" The girl turned her glowing arm so he could see the shifting symbols. "This is the mark of the desert," she said. "It was carved by those who came before me, my ancestors who walked with both power and sorrow. They carried knowledge too dangerous to be left free, so they tied it in knots, bound it with cloth, and passed it through bloodlines. Each generation, one child was chosen to carry the seal. Her eyes darkened, shadowed with memory. That child was me. Man alone swallowed hard. He wanted to speak, but no words came. The glow on his hands pulsed again, and he felt the desert stir inside him. A vibration in the ground. A whisper in the wind, a presence pressing against his mind. The girl looked at him, her gaze sharp and filled with sorrow. You should never have touched it. You were not chosen, yet by your own hand you tied yourself to it. Now the burden is yours as much as mine. He shook his head slowly. I didn't know. I thought it was a story, a superstition. I didn't believe. She cut him off, her voice rising. Superstition does not carve fire into your skin. Look at yourself. Manalone glanced down again. The faint symbols on his palms burned brighter, twisting in patterns that matched hers. He clenched his fists, but the light bled through his skin. The girl sighed, her voice dropping back to a whisper. It is not your fault. Curiosity is a dangerous hunger. It is what destroyed my family. It is what cursed me. And now it has found you. Man alone leaned forward, desperate for answers. Tell me everything. No more riddles. What is bound in these knots? What did your people hide? The girl was silent for a long time. Her eyes drifted to the canyon walls where shadows lingered like silent guardians. Finally she spoke, her words slow and heavy. Long ago, before my people walked this desert freely, there was a time of war. Not the kind of war you know, with armies and weapons. This was a war of spirits, of unseen forces that lived in the earth, the sky, and the fire. My ancestors called upon them for strength. They asked the desert to fight with them, to shield them from enemies, and the desert answered. Her hand trembled as she lifted her glowing arm closer to the fire. But what the desert gave was not a gift. It was a debt. The power came with a hunger of its own. It demanded blood, demanded lives. My ancestors saw too late that they had unleashed something they could not control. Villages burned without flame. Men fell without wounds. Children vanished in the night, taken by shadows that wore no faces. The power turned against those who called it. Man alone felt his skin crawl as her words painted the vision. He remembered the flashes he had seen when he untied the knot. Villages swallowed by sand. Voices crying out as unseen hands dragged them into the earth. His chest tightened, and he realized those visions were not just images. They were memories, echoes of what the desert had witnessed. The girl lowered her arm. To save what was left of our people, the elders gathered in secret. They called upon their last strength, binding the desert's hunger into symbols carved with fire. They sealed it with knots, cloth, and blood. Each generation, one child was marked to carry the seal to keep the hunger bound. If the knot stayed tied, the desert slept. If it was undone, she looked directly at him, her eyes burning with fear. The hunger would wake. Man alone's mouth went dry. He glanced again at his glowing hands. And now? He asked, his voice breaking. The girl's gaze was heavy, filled with sorrow. Now it is awake, and it will not go back to sleep easily. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the air. The canyon seemed to breathe, the rocks groaning faintly as if alive. Man alone felt the weight of the truth pressing down on him. He had untied something meant to remain sealed, and now the burden of it lay on his shoulders. The girl studied him carefully. Do you feel it yet? She asked. Man alone hesitated, then nodded. I feel something. It's like the desert itself is inside me, watching me, waiting. She closed her eyes. That is the hunger. It will not harm you yet, but the longer you carry it, the more it will test you. It will whisper to you, tempt you, try to break you. And if you give in... She let the sentence hang unfinished, but the meaning was clear. Man alone looked at her glowing arm again. And you? You have carried this your whole life? She nodded slowly. Since I was a child. My father tied the cloth. He told me never to let anyone touch it, never to untie it no matter what. He said the desert would always follow me, but the knot would keep it bound. When he died, the burden became mine alone. Her voice shook as she continued. I have lived with whispers all my life. They followed me in dreams, in shadows, in silence. I lost my family to them. And now, because of you, they are awake again. Man alone bowed his head, guilt tightening his chest. I didn't mean to. I thought it was just a knot. The girl's eyes softened, though sorrow still filled them. A knot can hold more than cloth. It can hold a people's last hope. And now that hope is broken. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The canyon was quiet, but the silence was heavy, filled with unseen weight. Finally, Man Alone lifted his head. His voice was steady, though his heart raced. "If I broke it, then I will carry it. I will not leave you to face this alone." The girl stared at him, surprise flashing in her eyes. "You do not understand. This is not a burden you can carry lightly. It will change you. It has already begun." He held up his glowing hands. "Then let it change me. I was a man with nothing, alone, wandering without purpose. Now the desert has tied me to something greater. I cannot turn away." Her eyes searched his face, testing his resolve. At last she sighed. "Then your path is bound to mine. What was mine alone is now ours. But know this, once the hunger wakes fully, it will not be content to whisper. It will rise." The embers of the fire flared as if to punctuate her words. Shadows stretched across the canyon walls, twisting into shapes that looked almost human, almost alive. The desert seemed to lean closer, listening. Man Alone felt the truth settle deep inside him. He was no longer man alone. The desert had chosen him just as it had chosen her. And now, whatever waited in the silence of the seal was no longer bound by knots or cloth. It was bound by them. The desert night was silent but alive. The air hung heavy, carrying a chill that penetrated even the thickest clothes. Man Alone and the Apache girl stood together near the fading fire, their bodies tense with anticipation. The symbols on their skin glowed softly, pulsing with the rhythm of a hidden heartbeat. The desert seemed to watch them, breathing slowly as though aware that the final test had begun. Man Alone looked at the girl. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. "I can feel it," he whispered. "It's moving. The desert is alive inside me." "Inside us," she nodded. "Yes, the seal we broke is waking. The hunger is stirring, and it will not wait for tomorrow." They stood together, shoulders squared, knowing that once the desert fully awakened, there would be no turning back. The whispers returned, faint at first, like the sighing of wind through rocks, then louder, more insistent. They were voices of those long gone, of ancestors, of watchers who had once carved the seal into existence. The ground beneath their feet trembled lightly, and the glowing symbols on their arms brightened as though feeding on the desert's energy. Man Alone felt a thrill and a fear unlike any he had ever known. His body was tense, but his mind was clearer than it had been in years. He realized that the desert was testing them, measuring their courage and resolve. The girl raised her glowing hand. "We must walk together," she said. "The desert will try to separate us. It will tempt you, Man Alone, but we cannot falter. If we do, the hunger will consume more than just us." Man Alone nodded, though his heart raced. He was no stranger to danger, but this was different. This was not the kind of danger you could fight with weapons or wit. This was alive, ancient, and cunning. As they moved deeper into the canyon, the desert seemed to shift around them. Shadows stretched unnaturally. Rocks that had been solid now looked like twisting shapes. The whispers grew louder, forming words he could almost understand. "Leave. You are not meant. Danger. Power." The girl guided him carefully. "Do not listen to them," she instructed. "The desert tests with fear. It wants us to turn back. It wants to undo what has begun." Man Alone clenched his fists, feeling the pulsing glow in his hands. "I will not turn back," he said firmly. "I made this choice. I will see it through." The canyon narrowed, walls pressing closer. The whispers became a roar, a cacophony of voices speaking in a language that touched the edges of his mind. Some voices were gentle, others harsh. Some sounded angry, some sorrowful. The desert itself was alive with memory and power, bound into the symbols now etched into their skin. The girl reached a small clearing where the firelight had once danced. The glow from their symbols reflected against the rocks, casting moving patterns that seemed to tell stories older than time. She knelt, touching the ground, whispering words in Apache that Man Alone could not understand. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Calling for guidance," she replied. "The desert spirits will not allow the hunger to rise without a challenge. They need to see if we are worthy. If we fail, it will take what it wants without mercy. If we succeed, we may control it, just enough to survive." The ground trembled again, and shadows on the rocks began to stretch like living creatures. One by one, faint forms appeared in the distance, shapes of warriors, elders, women, and children who had long passed, all watching. They carried no weapons, yet their presence filled the canyon with a power that made the hair on Man Alone's arm stand on end. The girl stood slowly, holding her glowing arm high. "Do you understand what this means?" she asked. "I think so," he said. though doubt lingered. We face the desert itself. Its power, its memory, its hunger, and it will test us to see if we are worthy. She nodded, her eyes fierce. Yes, and it will not be gentle. The wind rose suddenly, carrying whispers that became voices, now almost words. You are not ready. Turn back. Danger. Hunger. Man alone felt the glow in his hands surge, the patterns twisting faster, pulsing with energy. His heart raced, but he focused on the girl beside him. Their symbols pulsed in unison, as if the desert demanded unity. The ground shook harder now, and the air itself felt thick, as if solid. A faint, glowing figure appeared in the center of the clearing, a spectral image of a warrior with eyes that seemed to see into his very soul. The girl fell to her knees in respect. This is the guardian, she whispered. It will decide if we are worthy. Stand strong, man alone, do not falter. The figure stepped forward, its form flickering like firelight. It reached toward them, though its hands never touched the ground. The desert hummed with power, and the glowing symbols on their arms pulsed in response. Man alone felt fear, but he also felt resolve. He had faced loneliness, hunger, and danger in his life, but nothing like this. Nothing that tested not just his strength, but his spirit. The guardian spoke not with words, but with a voice that filled his mind. Why do you disturb the seal? Why do you carry what is not yours? Man alone took a deep breath. I did not know it was mine. But now that I am bound, I will not leave it behind. I will face it. I will protect it, and I will protect her. The guardian paused, and the girl whispered something in her language. The air seemed to still, the wind holding its breath. Then the guardian extended its hands, and a wave of energy rolled across the clearing. It was not harmful, but it tested their spirit. Man alone felt memories not his own press into his mind. Visions of ancestors, sacrifices, battles, and wisdom carved in the desert for generations. He faltered for a moment, almost overwhelmed, but the girl reached for his hand. Together they stood firm. The guardian's gaze swept over them. The desert itself seemed to judge their hearts. Moments stretched like hours. The glow in their arms flared brightly, almost blinding, and then silence. The figure nodded once and slowly dissolved into the night air. The wind calmed, the whispers faded. The desert seemed still again, but it was not empty. It was awake, aware, but it had accepted them. The girl exhaled, lowering her glowing arm. We passed the test, she said softly. The desert knows we are strong enough, for now. But remember, it is patient. It will watch. And it will always test. Man alone looked at his hands, still glowing faintly. We did it? Yes, she replied, we did. But this is only the beginning. You are bound to the seal as much as I am. Our lives will never be the same. We carry the desert's memory, its hunger, and its protection, and together we must guard it. He nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He had been a wanderer with nothing. Now he carried the power and responsibility of generations, bound by a knot he had untied. But fear did not dominate him. There was courage, resolve, and a strange sense of purpose that he had never known. The first light of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the desert in pale gold once again. The wind softened, carrying the scent of sand and ancient earth. The fire had died to embers, but the symbols on their arms glowed faintly, a reminder of the bond, the desert, and the responsibility they now shared. Man alone stood tall, looking out over the desert that had once seemed endless and empty. Now it was alive with history, memory, and power. He turned to the girl. We face it together, he said. She nodded, a small smile breaking through her fear. Together. And with that they stepped forward into the desert, not as a lone wanderer and a fearful girl, but as guardians of a secret older than the sands themselves. The desert whispered around them, alive and patient, knowing that its secrets were safe for now, held by those brave enough to face its hunger,